Noah was only 10 years old, excited and nervous as he settled into his seat for the long flight. He clutched the armrest, his wide eyes scanning the busy cabin. He had no idea that in just moments his world would be shaken. The slap came fast, sharp, shocking. Lauren, the flight attendant, leaned over and struck him across the face, her voice sharp, her tone dripping with authority she thought she owned. The sound echoed through the cabin, silencing passengers, freezing them in disbelief. A child, struck, humiliated, and left trembling in his seat. But what Lauren didn't know, what no one on that flight could have guessed, was that Noah's father, David, was sitting just a few rows away. To everyone else, he looked like any other man in a crisp suit, quiet and composed. But behind that calm exterior was a truth that would turn this moment upside down. David wasn't just a passenger. He was the man who owned the very airline Lauren worked for. The tension in the air was unbearable. Passengers whispered, eyes darting between the terrified boy and the attendant who stood rigid, convinced she was in control. But David, he didn't leap up. He didn't shout. He simply watched, his silence heavier than thunder, his calm masking a storm that was about to break. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who holds real power, hidden until the exact right moment. And so the question lingers. What happens when false authority collides with true power? What happens when a flight attendant slaps a boy, only to discover his father owns the skies she works in? Stay with me, because what happened next would leave an entire plane full of passengers speechless. David Lawson wasn't just a businessman. He was a builder of dreams. Years ago, he started with nothing but determination and an idea. Over time, through sleepless nights, sharp decisions, and sacrifices most people could never imagine, he became the owner of one of the most successful airlines in the country. Yet despite his wealth and status, David carried himself with humility. To him, life was not about showing off power, but about ensuring his son, Noah, grew up knowing dignity, respect, and love. For 10-year-old Noah, the world was still full of wonder. He loved airplanes, the sound of engines roaring, the way the clouds danced outside the window. Flying wasn't just travel for him, it was magic. He often asked his father questions. How do these big machines stay in the sky? Or what's it like to own an airline? David always smiled, answering patiently, proud that his son's curiosity was endless. On this particular day, their flight wasn't meant to be extraordinary. It was supposed to be simple. A quiet trip, father and son together. Just another journey across the skies they had conquered. The cabin hummed with ordinary life, families settling in, business travelers opening laptops, children pressing faces against the window to see the runway below. But beneath the calm hum of engines and chatter, something darker lingered, something David knew all too well. Because no matter his success, no matter his titles or wealth, the world never let him forget the color of his skin. He had felt the sting of being underestimated in boardrooms, the cold stares at exclusive events, the subtle dismissals that told him you don't belong here, and now, he feared his son Noah was beginning to see those same shadows. He worried that innocence would fade too quickly, that the world would try to teach Noah cruelty before he even had a chance to grow. David looked over at his boy that day, the joy in his eyes, the excitement of being on another plane. He wanted to protect that joy for as long as he could, but fate had other plans, because in just minutes, Noah would come face to face with an act of cruelty that was as shocking as it was senseless. An act that would expose the deep prejudice still hiding in plain sight, even at 30,000 feet above the ground. And when it came, David would be forced to choose, remain silent, or unleash the power of the man who not only sat in those seats, but owned the very wings carrying them. The seatbelt light flickered off. Passengers began to settle, some flipping through magazines, others adjusting their headphones. For Noah, it was pure excitement. He loved flying more than anything. His small face pressed against the cool airplane window, watching the world shrink below, but then came the voice. Sharp, cold, sit back properly, Lauren snapped. Her tone wasn't the kind of gentle guidance you'd expect from a flight attendant. It was hard, dismissive. Noah froze for a moment, unsure if she was even speaking to him. Then her shadow loomed over his seat, and her eyes narrowed. I said, "Sit back properly. Don't lean on the window like that. You people never follow instructions." Those words cut deeper than the order itself. You people. The phrase that carried centuries of weight, the kind that turned innocence into shame. Noah sank back into his seat, confused, his excitement draining into silence. David, from across the aisle, caught every word. His jaw tightened, but he stayed quiet. For now, the plane hummed along. Drinks were served. Conversations buzzed, but the tension lingered like static in the air. Lauren's eyes kept darting toward Noah, each glance colder than the last. When she came down the aisle again, she stopped abruptly by his row. "Where's your ticket, boy?" she demanded. Noah blinked, startled. "My dad has it. That's not good enough. If you can't show me, you shouldn't be here." Passengers shifted uncomfortably, watching as the boy fumbled with his words. David rose slightly from his seat, his calm voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the aisle. "He's with me." Lauren turned, eyes flashing with irritation. But when she saw David's calm, unwavering stare, she muttered something under her breath and moved on. Still, the damage was done. The whispers began. Some passengers frowned at the unfairness. Others looked away, pretending not to see. Noah sat smaller in his seat now, the wonder in his eyes replaced with unease. He asked in a trembling whisper, "Dad, did I do something wrong?" David's hand rested firmly on his son's shoulder. "No, you did nothing wrong." But inside, he was burning. Minutes later, Lauren returned, this time with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She leaned closer to Noah, her voice sharp, but coated in false sweetness. "Children like you need to behave. Don't cause trouble for the other passengers." And then, in a flash of anger or arrogance, maybe both, her hand came down. A sharp slap across Noah's cheek. The cabin went silent. Gasps erupted. A woman covered her mouth in horror. Someone whispered, "Did she just—" Noah's face stung. His small body trembled. His eyes filled with tears, not just from pain, but from humiliation, confusion. He didn't understand why he was being treated like this. David stood, slowly, deliberately. Every passenger's eyes locked onto him. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lunge. But the sheer presence of his calm, unshakable composure sent a chill through the aisle. Lauren stepped back, her bravado faltering for the first time. David's voice was low, but every word carried the weight of authority. "Touch my son again, and you'll regret it." The silence was deafening. Even the hum of the engines seemed to fade. Passengers leaned in, their curiosity, their fear, their shock all hanging in the air like suspended glass. But David didn't reveal himself yet. He didn't tell her who he was or the empire he commanded. He simply sat back down, pulling Noah closer, his hand shielding the boy from the venom in the skies. And as the plane soared higher, so did the tension, because everyone on that flight now knew this wasn't over. The cabin was frozen in silence, as if time itself had stopped. Noah sat trembling, his small cheek still glowing red from the sting of Lauren's hand. His watery eyes darted around the cabin, searching for safety, for understanding, but most passengers avoided his gaze, ashamed of their own silence. Lauren stood tall, as if daring anyone to challenge her authority, her chin raised, her voice slicing through the tense air. "Passengers must obey the rules. If this child can't behave, I'll have security waiting when we land." The audacity of her words hit like a second slap. A ripple of disbelief ran through the rows. Some passengers muttered under their breath. Others shook their heads. But still no one spoke up. Fear held them in place, everyone, except David. Slowly he rose from his seat. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the controlled precision of a man who knew the weight of every move he made. The overhead lights cast his tall frame in a commanding glow. Every eye in the cabin shifted to him. Noah clutched at his father's hand, his small fingers trembling, seeking comfort. David looked down at him for a brief moment, his calm eyes full of reassurance, then turned his gaze toward Lauren. "Enough," he said. The single word cut sharper than a blade. Lauren froze, her confidence faltering, as the authority in his voice sank into the air like stone. But she tried again, her voice trembling under her forced control. "Sir, you need to sit down." You don't get to threaten me. I have authority here. David's eyes narrowed. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He simply stepped closer, his presence swallowing the space between them. His voice dropped to a low, steady tone that carried to every corner of the cabin. You have authority? No. What you have is arrogance. You assaulted a child, my child. And now you're about to learn the difference between power
and real authority.
A murmur swept the cabin. Passengers leaned forward, sensing the storm about to break. Lauren's composure cracked. If you don't sit down right now, You'll what? David interrupted, his voice unyielding. Call the captain? Bring in security? Do you have any idea who you just put your hands on? Her lips parted, but no sound came out. David straightened, his calm demeanor wrapping around him like armor. Then, with chilling precision, he revealed the truth. My name is David Lawson. I don't just fly on this airline. I own it. The words dropped like thunder in the cabin. Gasps erupted. Passengers exchanged wide-eyed stares. Some even clapped hands over their mouths in disbelief. Lauren staggered back, her face paling. Her voice caught in her throat, suddenly fragile. What? I built this airline from the ground up, David said firmly, his voice carrying decades of strength, struggle, and resilience. Every plane in this fleet, every uniform you wear, every paycheck you take home, all of it exists because I made it possible. And you just struck my son. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every passenger felt the weight of his words. Lauren's arrogance shattered into fear. She stammered, reaching for excuses. I didn't mean he wasn't following instructions. But David's gaze silenced her. His voice grew colder, sharper. You didn't see a boy. You saw his skin, and you thought that gave you the right to treat him as less. But what you didn't realize is that the boy you humiliated, the child you slapped, carries my name. And with that name comes a legacy you will never destroy. Noah looked up at his father, eyes wide with both awe and relief. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt safe again. The passengers, emboldened by David's stand, began murmuring in agreement. One woman near the front stood. She slapped that boy for no reason. We all saw it. Another man added, it was wrong. She crossed the line. The tide was turning. The silence of the crowd gave way to unity. Lauren's face twisted, her voice breaking. Please, I didn't know. I thought... David's voice thundered now, no longer calm but commanding. You thought wrong, and when we land, you'll answer for it. The captain's voice suddenly crackled over the intercom, uneasy, as if he'd sensed the storm from behind the locked cockpit door. Is everything all right in the cabin? David turned his gaze upward, his voice steady. Captain, everything will be fine. But I suggest you prepare to file an incident report, because one of your crew just violated the very principles of this airline. The cabin erupted with nods, whispers, and quiet affirmations. Passengers who had once looked away now stared directly at Lauren, their silence replaced with judgment. Lauren's knees seemed to buckle beneath the weight of humiliation. Her authority evaporated. She wasn't in control anymore. David was, but he didn't stop there. He leaned down, his words deliberate, ensuring she felt every syllable. You've exposed more than your prejudice tonight. You've exposed the reality that racism still hides in plain sight, even 30,000 feet in the air, and now, the world will know. Noah's small hand squeezed his father's, strength returning to his trembling fingers. He whispered softly, Dad. Thank you. David knelt down, meeting his son's tearful eyes. His voice softened, but it carried the same iron will. Noah, never forget this. You are not less. You are not small. And no one, not in this world, not in the skies above it, has the right to treat you otherwise. The passengers erupted into applause, the sound echoing like a roar through the metal cabin. The moment had shifted completely, but David wasn't smiling. His eyes were cold, fixed on Lauren, who stood pale and trembling, because for him this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. And as the plane cut through the night sky, one thought hung heavy in the cabin, unspoken but undeniable. When the wheels touched the ground, justice would be waiting. The cabin stayed tense for the rest of the flight. Lauren avoided the aisle where David and Noah sat, her face drained of all confidence. Every passenger had seen it, the slap, the humiliation, the arrogance, and every passenger had seen it unravel in front of them. David didn't speak another word during the flight. He sat beside his son, his presence a shield, his silence heavier than anger. Noah rested his head against his father's arm, safe now, but shaken. His cheek still burned, but what stayed with him more was the way the woman in uniform had looked at him, the way her words had stripped away his joy. When the plane finally touched down, the wheels screeching against the runway, the cabin exhaled in collective relief. But for Lauren, the landing brought no safety. 2 security officers stood at the gate, waiting. Their radios crackled, their expressions firm. Passengers whispered as they filed out, many shaking David's hand, thanking him for standing up not only for his son, but for something much bigger. Some even promised to write statements, to speak out if needed. For once, the silence of bystanders had been broken. Lauren tried to slip past, her head low, but David's voice stopped her cold. "You're not walking away from this." The officers stepped forward, blocking her path. One of them turned to David. "Mr. Lawson, we'll handle it from here." Lauren's eyes widened. "Mr. Lawson?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The name she had ignored, the man she had dismissed, now stood as the owner of everything she thought she controlled. She was escorted off the plane in silence. Passengers watched, some shaking their heads, others recording on their phones. Her authority was gone, replaced by humiliation and consequences she could no longer escape. The incident didn't stay on the plane. By the time David and Noah reached their home city, the story had already spread. Passengers had posted videos, tweets, first-hand accounts. The headline exploded across news outlets. Flight attendant slaps child. Father revealed as airline owner. The world reacted with outrage. Parents were horrified. Activists demanded answers. And within 24 hours, the airline's board released a public statement. Effective immediately, the flight attendant involved in the incident has been terminated. The airline has launched a full investigation, and we reaffirm our zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination and misconduct. But the story didn't stop there. For David, this wasn't just about one woman's actions. It was about something deeper, the culture that allowed prejudice to seep into uniforms, into titles, into the false authority that had emboldened her. He called an emergency board meeting. His voice was calm, but his words left no room for argument. This isn't about firing one employee. This is about changing the system. We cannot allow racism to wear our uniform. We cannot allow prejudice to sit in our aisles. And we cannot allow any passenger, especially a child, to be treated as less than human. He ordered sweeping reforms, mandatory anti-discrimination training, stricter hiring protocols, anonymous reporting systems for passengers and staff alike, and most importantly, he made it clear that every employee, from pilots to attendants, must carry respect as their highest duty. Noah, watching from the sidelines, saw something more than business. He saw his father transform a personal wound into a mission, a fight not just for himself, not just for him, but for every passenger who had ever felt small, invisible, or unwelcome in the skies. The changes didn't stop at David's airline. Other carriers, under public pressure, began announcing similar reforms. Competitors who once scoffed at him now followed his lead. What began as a slap in a single cabin became a wave of accountability across the industry. The story became a symbol, a reminder that racism wasn't confined to the streets or boardrooms. It could appear anywhere, even at 30,000 feet, hidden behind uniforms and authority. And if it could happen there, it could happen anywhere. Communities rallied. Parents told their children about Noah's courage. Schools invited David to speak about leadership, dignity, and standing against prejudice. Activists cited the incident as proof that silence only empowers hate, but courage defeats it. And for Noah, the lesson was personal, unforgettable. He had seen cruelty, but he had also seen justice. He had felt the sting of being targeted, but he had also felt the strength of his father's protection and the power of truth revealed. But victory didn't erase the pain. That night, as Noah lay in bed, he asked his father a question that broke David's heart. "Dad, will people always look at me like that? Like I don't belong?" David sat beside him, his hand resting gently on his son's shoulder. His voice was steady, but his eyes carried the weight of generations. Some will, Noah, because they refuse to see past their hate. But that's their weakness, not yours. You are more than their ignorance. You are my son. You carry strength, dignity, and a name that means something. And as long as I live, I'll fight to make sure you, and every child like you, can walk through this world with pride. Noah nodded slowly, comforted by his father's words, but deep down, David knew the fight was far from over. The story of that flight became more than an incident. It became a parable, a reminder that racism doesn't just bruise the skin, it bruises dignity, identity, and community. Racism destroys families. It turns children's laughter into tears. It plants fear where there should be wonder. Prejudice weakens communities. It divides neighbors, poisons workplaces, and turns allies into strangers. But unity heals. That day, passengers who had once stayed silent found their voices. Strangers stood up, their applause echoing in the cabin, reminding everyone that courage is contagious, and courage defeats hate. David's strength, his refusal to stay silent, turned humiliation into reckoning, prejudice into reform, and one boy's tears into a lesson for the world. In the end, it wasn't just about a father defending his son. It was about a man refusing to let hate define the skies he had built. It was about a child learning that even in the face of cruelty, dignity can rise higher than hate. And it was about us, a reminder that silence is never neutral, and justice only takes flight when we choose to stand, to speak and to act, because racism may destroy, but courage always rebuilds.